Hey, Mr. Pond
Here we go.
Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lucker Lake dreams come true.
Well, it must be 6:30 on a Wednesday. Hello, everybody. Bob Lusk, editor of Pond Boss Magazine, longtime fisheries biologist, checking in with you guys. Glad you're here. Thanks for hanging out. Good gosh, we've had some weird weather lately, haven't we? Looks like Leo's checking in from the left coast. Well, Leo, good to see you, buddy. You know, it's the weather has really had a big impact on the things we're doing to manage ponds right now, and I want to cover a bunch of that stuff today. Good gosh, just right here in North Texas. We've seen temperatures. Today it was in the 70s. Earlier in the week it was 24 degrees with a high in the 40s. You know, so when you've got these up and down temperatures, that makes a big difference on what happens with your pond and what goes on. You know, and the way your fish act, the way your plants act. Gosh, there's some ponds that already have ice on them, and that's really, really early this time of year. Because typically most ponds, they don't ice up even in the north until way up into December typically. So I want to talk about that kind of thing. Already got a little scratchy throat, boys. Here we go. So, of course, you guys know the drill. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comment section. Click like and share this to your timeline if you don't mind. You'll be eligible for a Pond Boss hat and a Pond Boss mug. Now, keep in mind, Pond Boss Magazine comes out every other month, $35 a year. Debbie and I went to dinner last night in Dallas, Texas, spent $45. That was gone today. This magazine lasts a year. So, please join us, really, I'm serious, because just that little $35, that's what fuels the economy of Pond Boss. So, good gosh, we got a bunch of questions to tackle. Looks like we got a whole bunch of guys hanging out with us. We're already up to 15 or 20, and that's only the ones we know. I know there's a lot more than that. So I'm going to do what I always do, find it on my laptop, which I'll see it here in a minute. Oh, there it is right there. Holy cow. I'm going to click it up here so I can see what's going on. Craig Guffin checking in from Sedalia. I'm going to get to your question here in a minute. Let's see, who's up first? Jacob West. Leo, I've said hi to Leo. Two other people, I don't know who it is. Dick Tabbert. John Funker, the new magazine's out for December. Yeah, they are. You should have gotten it by now. If you haven't gotten it, just call the office and let us know. Yeah, I bet you are pretty cold up in mid-Michigan. Troy Todd. Frank James. Hi, Frank. I'll tackle your question in a minute. Steve Seitz. Good to see you. Hey, I appreciate the plug a while ago, man. I saw that. Jacob West from West Texas. Woo, you must be hunting. Good to see you. Mike Cottrell. His wife surprised him with a 2-year subscription. Now, that's what we love about a good wife. We've all got one. At least I do. I know you do too. So, let's tackle some of these topics. I want to go in here and... Oh, there's Dave Weber checking in. Hey, Dave, if you haven't gotten your copy of the magazine yet, you are in it. You prompted an article when we visited there at John Burns' place. So when you asked me what are the top 5 things about managing a pond, well, I went back home and I started thinking about that, and I thought that's a really good topic for an article. So your name is in the November, December issue of Pond Boss, so be sure and take a look at it when you get it, because even though I wrote it, it's a pretty cool story because of your question. You know, you made me think, and I love to do that, which allows me to kind of convey some things that are in my mind and some discussions I've had with other people, so I can share that with you guys and help get the word out. So grab a hold of it, man. Let's see, my control is, yep, okay, let's see here. All right, let's tackle some of these things. I'm going to circle back here and find a couple of questions, then come back to the live feed. Because Craig Guffin asked a really interesting question here a while ago. All right, Craig Guffin says, hey, Pond Boss, while I'm waiting, I'm currently building a pond that will end up being about 3+ acres and about 13 to 15 feet deep. I was in communication with Nate Herman about a month ago, who's given me a recipe to grow huge black crappie. I don't ever hear much about growing crappie. I was listening the other day and heard that maybe I should rethink putting fathead minnows and golden shiners in the same pond to set up the forage. I'm in Sedalia, Missouri, and would appreciate any advice. I do plan on aeration and feeding Aquamax 500. I believe is what he recommended. I will double check my notes to make sure. Thank you. Well, Craig, here's what I think about that. 3 acres of water is pretty small to try to grow great big crappie in. Now, here's the obstacles that you've got to overcome. Crappie spawn earlier than most other fish every spring, and they're unpredictable spawners. Their spawns are pretty much based on weather patterns. So in the springtime, if you get back-to-back cold fronts like we did in, I guess it was probably 2016 and 2017, we had back-to-back cold fronts over a 4-week span that would push the temperature up, then it would drop, up, then drop. When that happens, they go off the nests. And when they go off the nest, they don't reproduce. If they don't reproduce, there is no new class coming in. So it makes them unpredictable. But then again, they might spawn year after year after year and then skip 2. So the unpredictability of their spawns makes them a little bit tough to manage. And you also consider that their top line predator fish limited by the size of their mouths. Their mouths are small. You know, even a 12-inch crappie's mouth is that big, where a largemouth bass's mouth is this big. So a bass has a competitive advantage to be able to feed across the food chain, or a crappie feed within a certain size range of the food chain. Here's what I mean about that. Crappie feed on minnows, bluegill, bass. So being limited by their mouth size, once a food item grows too large, they can't eat it. That can happen in 6 weeks in a small pond. And throw that in with the fact that crappie are early spawners and their babies are eating babies coming off of nests and they're unpredictable, makes them really tough to manage. The good news is with a 3-acre pond, if it doesn't work after 5 or 6 years, it's easy to change, doesn't cost a lot of money. If you want to give it a try, man, I'm all for it. Give it a try. Just see what happens and see how it works. I see David Reichs. Okay, I got a whole bunch of guys checking in here. So here's my bottom line about crappie, Craig, is they're not big enough to be high-end predators, and they're too big to be low-end predators. So they're going to feed in the middle of your food chain. I don't think fathead minnows can keep up with them by about the 3rd or 4th year. Golden shiners can, but the problem you're going to run into is how to feed all the size classes of crappie as you get into the years 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's where it's going to be a little bit tough. So now let's go back here. Holy cow, it's going to be a coffin night. I can see it. Let's see here. I'm going to talk to, I know that Frank James had a question. I saw it come up, so let me find that real quick. Frank says, Bob, Justin recommended I stock Threadfin shad to help feed my 10 to 14-inch largemouth bass. Here's my question. Would it be smarter to wait until the spring to do so? I'm afraid the shad would die in the cold winter. Yes, you should wait until spring there, Frank. Where you are, where your pond is in northeast Texas, you're right along that line where you're likely to get water temperatures 42 degrees or cooler. Now keep in mind that shad die when it drops below 42 degrees. So if you're in an area of the planet where your water temperature gets below 42, fall's not a good time to stock shad. Now where that line really is, I'm going to tell you a line from east and west going through Waco, Texas to say Monroe, Louisiana, up to Jackson, Mississippi, and then curving up north, going into the Atlantic seaboard. You could stock Threadfin shad now, and they probably do fine over the winter. Plus, here's a cool thing about Threadfin shad, is those folks that produce them would be happy to sell some of them this time of year. They want to sell some of them this time of year because they don't have to carry them through the winter. Because if the fish farm has a cold winter, they're going to lose their shad, which happened to several hatcheries last year. So, where you are, Frank, don't buy them. But if you're along or south of that line I described, you bet, think about it. John Funk in Michigan, he says, we've had an early cold weather and pond ice over. Any suggestion for what looks like to be a very long winter with lots of ice cover? Feeding? Add more minnows? Thanks. Well, here's the problem. And I did want to talk about winterizing your pond. Plus, I want to talk about what an early winter does to your fishery as well. With winterizing, of course, it's easy to take care of the equipment. Let your feeders run out of feed. The batteries can stay out there if you want, or you can turn the feeders off, bring the batteries in, make sure they're fully charged. A lot of guys will put their batteries in the freezer. Put them in a plastic bag, put them in the freezer. If you want to leave them in your feeder, nothing wrong with that, especially if you have a solar charger to keep them charged. There's nothing wrong with a feeder running all winter long to keep it active. Nothing wrong with that. On your aeration systems, it's time to shut down. I would shut down all aeration by now. When your water temperature hits 55 degrees, it's time to cut that off. Because what happens is when your water temperature hits in the mid-50s and then you continue to aerate, you can actually make your water too cold. Good gosh, I mean in the north, John, where you are in mid-Michigan, if you were aerating right now, which I hope you're not, if you're not, then the bottom temperatures of your pond are in the 40s. The top is cold, in the 30s. Of course, right up there by the ice, it's 32 degrees or cooler. And, dadgummit, here we go. I've had a little sore throat the last few days. I've been battling that, so this might be a short show. Anyway, you want to shut your aeration down. If you do want to aerate through the wintertime, and I'll tell you why you should, if you want to. If you are subject to winter kill, go ahead and aerate, but bring your diffuser up shallow if you're using bottom diffuser. Dadgummit. Yeah, I know y'all are all sympathizing with me. I get it. But here we go. What are you doing about that cough, James Bola Masses? Yeah, I see Fred Bingman in there talking about this stuff. I'm going to click on this so I can see what's going on here. It says the live video has been interrupted. I don't know why. Ooh, Lord. Man, I'm so apologizing for that. Okay, so anyway, where I wanted to go with that comment is that if you want to aerate in the north to minimize the risk of winter kill, pull your diffusers up shallow. Put them in about 5 feet of water. You don't really want them much shallower than that, and they're going to keep a hole open, which bugs me because that compromises the safety of your ice. So if you're going to aerate in the winter, then do it shallow. All right, let's see here. David Rocks, Fred Bingaman, Frank James, thanks, you bet. Yep, all right. Jason Nipstad checking in, Tim Wood, dropping some knowledge, Bob, as always, you bet. Glad to do that, man. Thanks, Billy Birch. Tom Davis checking in from Ohio. Dave Weber, got it, read it all, good deal. Jeremy Duckworth, hey Jeremy, good to see you, buddy. Steve Sykes, good to see you again. Okay, now I think I've kind of caught up on all this stuff. Golly, I'm so sorry about that. All right, there's Joanne Pelifant coming in from Waynesville, North Cackalack. All right, replying to David Kelly Farkas. Hi, Dave. Hi, Bob. Hey, guys. All right, so now, one thing I do want to talk about, because I can see this show coming to a close here before long, is what has this cool weather done to your fishery? Well, let me tell you what happens. In the fall, we typically have an abundance of little bitty bait fish. And if you think about that, your fish have spawned in the spring. Bluegill spawned again in the summer. They spawned again in the fall, typically. Now in the north, those numbers are a little different. But when we go into the fall, that's when we have the most abundant amount of forage fish. That's when our bait fish really jump in and start to feed all of our game fish. The game fish are putting on the weight right now. That's what we want. Now that typically happens when the water temperature is in the 60s to the mid 70s. And, you know, when those fish are gorging themselves in the fall, they're really putting on fat and they're gaining weight so they can have a better winter and develop their eggs. The females are developing eggs. So right now is a time that our fish should really, really be eating a lot of forage fish. Bait fish numbers should be going down. Game fish weight should be going up. But when we've had such a dramatic, rapid drop of temperatures, that slows down the whole process. Game fish don't feed as quickly. They don't gain as much weight as quickly. And that can be an issue for next spring. That's going to influence your spawns, which I'm not too worried about it, because even during the wintertime when the water's cool, game fish will still eat, but they're eating more to maintain than they are to gain. Where right now, toward the end of November, our fish should be gaining as much weight as they can to go into the winter. Now, the thing about it is when our fish go into the wintertime and they've gained adequate amounts of weight, their energy stores come off of their fat stores. So their metabolism is pretty much based on the amount of fat that they've got stored up. So if they get cut short on the time that they get to be able to gain weight and forage, that's going to affect how much weight they gain. That's going to affect how they come out of the winter. So, if a fish's goal is to come out of the winter without losing a whole lot of weight, and the only weight that they lose comes from fat that they've metabolized or food that they've eaten. When a fish eats this time of year and your water temperature's in its 50s, like a lot of our ponds are, it might take them 4 days to digest a fish that they ate, where typically in a normal day in the summertime or the fall, it takes 1 day to digest it. So that's a pretty big deal. See Philip Wildman checking in. Hey, Philip. Todd Austin joined in. So Leo says, speaking of shallow aeration and not compromising the protective layer during winter, what is your view on a thick floating black visqueen in a dedicated area to prevent the cold air from invading the lower water column while allowing enough oxygen to be diffused in the shallow water column? Leo, I think that's a great idea if it would work that way. I'm not sure it would work that way, because when you're diffusing air through a diffuser, that bubble plume's coming up, and even though it's about this big around when it hits the surface in shallow water, when it hits that visqueen, it's got to spread out and still make itself available up to the surface. I mean, one thing that could be done is to cut the aeration volume back without compromising the efficiency of the air compressor to keep the air from making a hole in the first place. I'd love that. Now the whole way an aeration system works, a bottom diffused aeration system, is to allow water to contact the atmosphere. When it contacts the atmosphere, that's how it can expel its gases and absorb new gases, especially oxygen. So I think it's pretty important that air from a diffused system contacts the atmosphere. Because keep in mind, when there's a winter kill probability or even a risk of winter kill, that comes because all the oxygen under the ice gets consumed. It gets consumed either by aerobic decomposition or composting of organic matter like decaying plankton, decaying algae, decaying plant matter, or it comes from respiration because plants can't photosynthesize because they're not getting sunlight penetration through the ice. Now, if you got clear ice, which is rare, then you don't have a lot to worry about. Your pond's going to produce its own oxygen. Keep in mind, oxygen comes from two sources. It comes from a photosynthesis from greenery in the water, which could be single-cell algae. It could be rooted plants, macrophytes. It could be from even suspended plants like coontail or bladderwort, or plants that don't even have roots. Or it comes from contact with the atmosphere. That's what aeration does. Aeration doesn't really aerate the water. It moves it so it can communicate with the atmosphere and absorb oxygen from the atmosphere. That's how diffused aeration works. I like your thinking. Hey, Jose Latour, good to see you, man. You joined in. Let's see, Chris Burris, is it possible to keep frog tadpoles alive with bass in your pond? Yeah, you can keep tadpoles alive with bass, but when they turn into frogs, you can't. Bass love frogs. There's something, this is kind of cool. You guys will probably appreciate this. Bass typically won't eat a tadpole because it tastes bad. There's something about a tadpole, some pheromone or something that a tadpole gives off that makes a bass not want to eat it. But you can pretty well bet when that tadpole turns into a bullfrog, which takes 2 years, by the way, that bullfrog doesn't stand much of a chance in a bass-heavy pond. You know, if you want to grow some bullfrogs, put them in a pond that doesn't have any fish in it. And then let them migrate. They'll move. They'll come around. Leanne's checking in. Good to see you. Let's see here. I'm looking for questions here. All right. Philip Wildman, you sang the song early on, buddy. Good to see it. So, here's some of the other things to think about in wintertime. If you've got under ice a pond with a lot of plants in it, then your risk of winter kill goes way, way up because of respiration. Now keep in mind, everybody needs to know this. This is real important. This is basic science that we're taught. I mean, I've got a 10-year-old granddaughter. She was talking to me about this a couple of weeks ago. She's learned this in the 4th grade. Respiration and photosynthesis. Plants, you know, we hear the stories which we can sympathize with about rainforests going away. Well, rainforests, where there's green plants and sunlight, those plants consume carbon dioxide and they give off oxygen during daylight hours in the presence of sunlight. Vice versa, in the absence of sunlight, plants respire. They take up oxygen, they use it, they give off carbon dioxide. So the more plants you have under ice, especially cloudy ice, the higher the risk that you're going to have an issue with winter kill. I mean, I got a message today from a guy in Iowa where he's starting to already see some fish coming up and they're covered in little white sores or white spots. Well, those fish are distressed for whatever reason. I'd have a hard time believing that they're struggling for oxygen, but it wouldn't surprise me. You know, so winterizing your pond means to assess and understand your risks. If you have a risk associated with aquatic plants, especially under ice, you need to think about what you can do about it. Steve Seitz says, question, can you provide guidance on supplemental forage stocking, shad versus golden shiners? 85-acre lake in its 5th year, stopped stocking in 2013. The past 2 years in January had a 1-day impact with shad kills, electrofishing and stats reflecting about 90% relative weight. Steve, remind me where that lake is. Here's the way I see an 85-acre lake. It's difficult to supplementally stock an 85-acre lake without a substantial budget, and the only reason to supplementally stock an 85-acre lake is if it's missing a key component of its fishery. So, Steve, you're in Georgia. Okay. What that means to me, look at that, Craig Guffin. Holy cow, Craig, you came in and bought something. I love it. I just got an email. Appreciate it, man. Subscribe to Pond Boss. It's a good thing. $35 a year. There it is. You know, while I'm plugging, I want to say thanks to Purina Mills for their sponsorship, as well as Texas Hunter and the Society of Lake Management Professionals. You know what? Let me jump in real quick. I'm going to go off topic a little bit. The SLMP, Society of Lake Management Professionals, is having a big conference in January that could be appropriate for you guys. Now, it's really kind of catering toward people that are professional pond managers, but guys like Fred Bingaman, you know, and maybe even Steve Seitz, you guys, that could be a conference you'd be interested in. It's going to be in Memphis, Tennessee. I think it's January 22, 23, 24. Go to the Society of Lake Management Professionals Facebook page, or they have a website as well, and they can help you with it. Yeah, Craig, thanks, man. I see that. I appreciate it. Anybody else going to subscribe? You know what, Craig, since you did that, we're going to send you a hat coming up. I'll tell Leanne. Leanne, if you're still listening, let's get Craig Guffin a hat. Get that to him in the mail. Okay, so Steve, Metro Atlanta, the only reason to supplementally stock that lake is if it's missing components that can't sustain themselves. Now, here's what I mean by that. Threadfin shad are a perfect example of that. And if you're far enough south that you're not quite subjected to water temperatures in the low 40s, talk to me. because buying threadfin shad in the fall is cheaper than doing it in the spring. Now, in terms of supplemental stocking of other forage fish, you know, if the lake was stocked properly in the first place, like I expect it was, then that's a management problem more than a stocking problem. Because, you know, when you've got a lake that was, let me see here, you said it's in the 5th year. Okay. If it doesn't have thread fins, stock thread fins. If you're trying to manage for trophy largemouth bass, think about stocking gizzard shad. Now, you know, I'll take a little heat for giving that advice because here's why. Every trophy largemouth bass lake that I've got under contract for management, we use gizzard shad, but here's the caveat. I want to make sure that at least 25% of the originally stocked fish are at least 17.5 or 18 inches or bigger. Because it takes a big mouth on a bass to keep gizzard shad from overpopulating. That's the issue. Gizzard shad grow fast, they get big, they don't die in cold weather. So you got to know what you're doing before you stock gizzard shad. Now, threadfin shad, totally different story. If you want to add golden shiners, you'd have to have a pretty big reason to add golden shiners. If that lake was stocked properly in the beginning, then the management strategy here in year 5 is probably going to be catered more toward harvesting the overcrowded bass classes, which I just about bet $100. Those are going to be bass in the 10 to 14, maybe 15-inch size range. If you'll call some of those bass, then the lake can probably keep up with itself with its forage fish. Here's what happens. When you stock your forage fish in the beginning and you stock the right numbers of the right species, your forage fish volume goes like this. Stock bass, here's year 1, year 2, year 3. And by year 3, the bass are reproducing. And when they start spawning, their babies are feeding on babies of your forage fish. So they can kind of get to where they overwhelm them. So as your bass continue to grow, then your forage fish start to get a little overwhelmed and they can decline, then your bass weights decline. That typically happens with bass in the 10 to 14-inch size class. It doesn't make sense to add more forage fish as much as it does to harvest the bass. Okay. I'm not really embarrassed by coughing. I just hate it for you guys. I'm going to take another drink. Okay, so on feeding fish in Palo Pinto, which is out west of Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, on the fringe of West Texas, where their rainfall is kind of feast or famine. Should I stop feeding as it tries to get colder, or keep feeding and just cut back? You know what, Mike? I'd cut back, but I would also study the fish and watch them, and if they're feeding well, then keep feeding. If they're real sluggish, cut back. If they stop feeding, then let your feeder run out and then fill it back up in the spring. Hey, Chris Dobbs, good to see you, buddy. Heard you guys caught a few fish the other day on Lake Texoma. That's a rumor. So, other things to kind of winterize your pond, it's time to take care of equipment. Right now is the time to service your air compressors. You know, put in new vanes or air filters or whatever you got to do to service it. So, you know what? I'm going to cut out a little early because this cough is going to drive you guys nuts. If you have any more questions, pitch them up there and I will answer them as we go. I thought I might be past this cough this week, but by golly, I'm not. So, I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will come back next Wednesday. Hopefully this cough will be gone. I see Daryl Lynn saying hello. Good to see you. But for now, adios. I'll see you next Wednesday.